The Kingdom of Benin, a West African legacy. Hidden in the heart of West Africa lies a forgotten empire that built walls longer than the Great Wall of China, crafted bronzes that stunned European invaders, and ruled with a power so feared they tried to erase it from history. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire of power and art. Before Europe's rise, there was Benin, a kingdom of kings who ruled with divine right, artists who forged history in bronze, and warriors who defended their land with unmatched strategy. But what happened to this mighty kingdom? And why has so much of its legacy been stolen, hidden, or forgotten? Stay with us as we uncover secrets buried for centuries, challenge what you think you know about African history, and reveal why the story of Benin could change how we see the world forever. In the dense rainforests of West Africa lies the ghost of an empire so powerful, so advanced, it defied the expectations of the world. This was no village. This was a city of light, of law, of artistry, a place where kings ruled with divine authority, and their legacy was carved into metal, not myths. The Kingdom of Benin, founded over 1,000 years ago, was one of Africa's greatest civilizations. Its capital, Benin City, had streets lit by torches, a complex government system, and walls so vast they were once called the world's largest earthworks. European invaders didn't discover a primitive people. They discovered an empire that rivaled their own. But in 1897, that legacy was nearly erased. Benin was burned, its treasures stolen, its story twisted or forgotten. The world was shown a lie, that Africa had no history. Now, we rewrite the story. This isn't just about Benin. It's about power, culture, resistance, and truth. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire of power and art. And resistance scroll. In this video, we'll uncover how the Kingdom of Benin rose, ruled, and fell, and why its echoes still shake the world today. If you think you know history, think again. Mystery and discovery. Deep in the heart of West Africa, hidden beneath centuries of silence, lies the ghost of an empire. An empire of bronze, blood, and brilliance. They called it the Kingdom of Benin, a place of towering earthworks, sacred kings, and artists who shaped history into metal. This was not myth. This was real. Benin City, 13th century, present-day Nigeria. And yet, few have heard of it. Fewer still understand what was lost when its capital burned in 1897. Power and sophistication. Long before the rise of European colonial empires, Benin was already a metropolis, organized, defended, alive. Its kings, known as Obas, ruled through divine right, protected by warriors, and advised by powerful guilds. The people of Benin mastered governance, engineering, and above all, art. The famed Benin Bronzes weren't mere decorations. They were royal records, visual testaments to generations of history, identity, and pride. So advanced were these works that when British soldiers first laid eyes on them, they refused to believe they were made by Africans. In 1897, British forces stormed Benin City in retaliation for a diplomatic incident. What followed was not justice, it was devastation. The city was looted. The Oba was exiled. Thousands of priceless artifacts were stolen and scattered across the globe. What couldn't be stolen was burned. An entire civilization reduced to ash and buried under colonial lies. But the story of Benin is not over. It lives on, in the memory of its people, in the fire of its artists, and in the demand for truth. Today, a new generation is reclaiming the legacy. The walls are rising again. The bronzes are finding their way home. And the world is beginning to ask, what else did we ignore or erase? This is not just African history. This is world history. And it's time we told it right. The Kingdom of Benin, a powerful pre-colonial West African state, flourished for centuries. It was renowned for its sophisticated bronze and ivory artistry, a testament to its advanced civilization and rich culture. Enduring heritage. Its intricate artworks, like the famous Benin Bronzes, continue to educate and inspire. This enduring heritage preserves a vital piece of African history and cultural identity. The Kingdom of Benin, or Empire of Benin, also known as Great Benin, is a traditional kingdom in southern Nigeria. It has no historical relation to the modern Republic of Benin, which was known as Dahomey from the 17th century until 1975. The Kingdom of Benin's capital was Edo, now known as Benin City in Edo State, Nigeria. The Benin Kingdom was one of the oldest and most developed states in the coastal hinterland of West Africa. It grew out of the previous Edo Kingdom of Ighodamagodo around the 11th century AD. It was annexed by the British Empire in 1897, but endured as a non-sovereign monarchy. West Africa, also known as Western Africa, is the westernmost region of Africa. The United Nations defines Western Africa as the 16 countries of Benin, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Togo, as well as St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha United Kingdom Overseas Territory. The population of West Africa is estimated at around 419 million people as of 2021 and at 381,981,000 as of 2017, of which 189,672,000 were female and 192,309,000 male. The region is demographically and economically one of the fastest growing on the African continent. Early history in West Africa includes a number of prominent regional powers that dominated different parts of both the coastal and internal trade networks, such as the Mali and Gao empires. West Africa sat at the intersection of trade routes between Arab-dominated North Africa and further south on the continent, the source of specialized goods such as gold, advanced ironworking, and ivory. After European exploration encountered rich local economies and kingdoms, the Atlantic slave trade built on already existing slave systems to provide labor for colonies in the Americas. After the end of the slave trade in the early 19th century, European nations, especially France and Britain, continued to exploit the region through colonial relationships. For example, they continued exporting a number of extractive goods, including labor-intensive agricultural crops like cocoa and coffee, forestry products like tropical timber, and mineral resources like gold. Since independence, many West African countries, such as the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal, have played important roles in the regional and global economies. West Africa has a rich ecology, with strong biodiversity and several distinct regions. The area's climate and ecology are heavily influenced by the dry Sahara to the north and east, which provides dry winds during the Harmattan, as well as the Atlantic Ocean to the south and west, which provides seasonal monsoons. This mixture of climates gives West Africa a rich and diverse array of biomes, from biodiversity-rich tropical forests to drylands supporting rare and endangered fauna such as pangolins, rhinoceros, and elephants. Because of the pressure for economic development, many of these ecologies are threatened by processes like deforestation, biodiversity loss, overfishing, pollution from mining, plastics and other industries, and extreme changes resulting from climate change in West Africa. Nigeria, officially the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is a country in West Africa. It is situated between the Sahel to the north and the Gulf of Guinea in the Atlantic Ocean to the south. It covers an area of 923,769 square kilometers and 356,669 square miles. With a population of more than 230 million, it is the most populous country in Africa and the world's sixth most populous country. Nigeria borders Niger in the north, Chad in the northeast, Cameroon in the east, and Benin in the west. Nigeria is a federal republic comprising 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, where its capital, Abuja, is located. The largest city in Nigeria by population is Lagos, one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world and the largest in Africa. Nigeria has been home to several indigenous material cultures, pre-colonial states and kingdoms since the 2nd millennium BC. The Nok culture, c. 1500 BC, marks one of the earliest known civilizations in the region. The Hausa kingdoms inhabited the north, with the Edo Kingdom of Benin in the south and Igbo Kingdom of Nri in the southeast. In the southwest, the Yoruba Ife Empire was succeeded by the Oyo Empire. The present-day territory of Nigeria was home to a vast array of city-states. In the early 19th century, the Fula Jihads culminated in the Sokoto Caliphate. The modern state originated with British colonization in the 19th century, taking its present territorial shape with the merging of the southern Nigeria Protectorate and the Northern Nigeria Protectorate in 1914. The British set up administrative and legal structures and incorporated traditional monarchs as a form of indirect rule. Nigeria became a formally independent federation on October 1, 1960. It experienced a civil war from 1967 to 1970, followed by a succession of military dictatorships and democratically elected civilian governments until achieving a stable government in the 1999 Nigerian presidential election. Nigeria is a multinational state inhabited by more than 250 ethnic groups speaking 500 distinct languages, all identifying with a wide variety of cultures. The three largest ethnic groups are the Hausa in the north, Yoruba in the west, and Igbo in the east, together constituting over 60% of the total population. The official language is English, chosen to facilitate linguistic unity at the national level. Nigeria's constitution ensures de jure freedom of religion, and it is home to some of the world's largest Muslim and Christian populations. Nigeria is divided roughly in half between Muslims who live mostly in the north part of the country and Christians, who live mostly in the south. Indigenous religions such as those native to the Igbo and Yoruba ethnicities are in the minority. Nigeria is a regional power in Africa and a middle power in international affairs. Nigeria's economy is the fourth largest in Africa, the 53rd largest in the world by nominal GDP, and 27th largest by PPP. Nigeria is often referred to as the Giant of Africa by its citizens due to its large population and economy, and is considered to be an emerging market by the World Bank. Nigeria is a founding member of the African Union and a member of many international organizations, including the United Nations, the Commonwealth of Nations, NEM, the Economic Community of West African States, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and OPEC. It is also a member of the Informal Mint Group of countries and is one of the next 11 economies. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the empire reached the height of its prosperity, expanding its territory, trading with European powers, and creating a remarkable artistic legacy in cast bronze, iron, brass, carved ivory, and other materials. By the 1st century BC, the Benin territory was partially agricultural, and it became primarily agricultural by around AD 500, but hunting and gathering of animals still remained important. Also by AD 500, iron was in use by the inhabitants of the Benin territory. Benin City, formerly Edo, sprang up by around AD 1000 and was located in a forest that could be easily defended. The dense vegetation and narrow paths made the city easy to defend against attacks. The rainforest helped in the development of the city because of its vast resources that could be exploited: fish from rivers and creeks, animals to hunt, leaves for roofing, plants for medicine, ivory for carving and trading, and wood for boat building. However, domesticated animals could not survive due to a disease spread by tsetse flies. After centuries of exposure, some animals, such as cattle and goats, developed a resistance to the disease. The earliest organized polity in the region that would become Benin was Igbo, which coalesced from existing autonomous communities in the late 1st millennium CE. The ruler was called Ogiso, the ruler of the sky. The Ogiso were responsible for putting in place many of the cultural and social traditions that have shaped Benin up to the present. Around the 13th century CE, Ogiso Owodo was overthrown by the people of Benin after a tumultuous and incompetent reign. In his place, they chose Evian, a popular and powerful Ogifa, earth priest and chief of the local Ifa people, as Okivbo, or head of state. Evian's later attempt to pass power to his son Ogiamwen, thereby creating a new royal dynasty, was resisted. The Idia ruling council of chiefs refused to sanction the move and sent emissaries requesting that a prince of Ile-Ife restore order and legitimacy to their throne. Historical traditions in Benin diverge on the details of these events. The official tradition records that Oranmian, son of Oduduwa, accepted the council's invitation. His arrival marked the beginning of the new dynasty and the establishment of the title Oba for the rulers of Benin. This version serves as a stock narrative used by the leaders of the Ife Empire to explain and justify the expansion of their cultural and economic sphere of influence into Igbo during this period. Another tradition, first recorded in the 1970s, provides a different story. While several versions exist, they all argue that the founding Oba was not a Yoruba, but was instead the son or grandson of Ogiso Owodo, natives of Benin who were in exile in Ife. Some go further, claiming that Owodo's son Ekalatterhan and Odujawa are the same person, and therefore that the Edo were responsible for the foundation or organization of Ife. Historians generally see these alternative accounts as recent inventions or distortions of older historical traditions in response to the dynamics of modern Nigerian society. Whether he was ethnically Yoruba or the son of an Edo exile, Oramien's claim to the throne was not universally acknowledged. Ogiamwen, son of Evian, had many supporters in the Ifa wards of the city and likely held power when Oramien arrived. A battle ensued between the two sides, with the newcomers, supported by the Idia Nevbo, managing to enter the city. Despite his victory, Oramien struggled to master the complex politics of the divided kingdom, particularly since he was a foreigner. He married Aranwind, daughter of a local chief, and they had a son Eweka. Exasperated and desiring to rule in Ife, Oramien abdicated the throne of Benin in favor of his son, saying that only a native could rule effectively. Eweka was crowned the first Oba of Benin, using special regalia sent by his father from Ife, and several local chiefs were appointed to help the young king rule. The Kingdom of Dahomey was a West African kingdom located within present-day Benin that existed from approximately 1600 until 1904. It developed on the Abumi Plateau amongst the Fon people in the early 17th century and became a regional power in the 18th century by expanding south to conquer key cities like Wida belonging to the Kingdom of Wida on the Atlantic coast, which granted it unhindered access to the tricontinental Atlantic slave trade. For much of the middle 19th century, the Kingdom of Dahomey became a key regional state, after eventually ending tributary status to the Oyo Empire. European visitors extensively documented the kingdom, and it became one of the most familiar African nations known to Europeans. The Kingdom of Dahomey was an important regional power that had an organized domestic economy built on conquest and slave labor. Significant international trade and diplomatic relations with Europeans, a centralized administration, taxation systems, and an organized military. Notable in the kingdom were significant artwork, an all-female military unit called the Dahomey Amazons by European observers, and the elaborate religious practices of Vodun. The growth of Dahomey coincided with the growth of the Atlantic slave trade, and it became known to Europeans as a major supplier of slaves. Dahomey was a highly militaristic society constantly organized for warfare. It captured captives during wars and raids against neighboring societies and sold them into the Atlantic slave trade in exchange for European goods such as rifles, gunpowder, fabrics, cowrie shells, tobacco, pipes, and alcohol. Other captives became slaves in Dahomey, where they worked on royal plantations or were killed in human sacrifices during the festival celebrations known as the annual customs of Dahomey. The annual customs of Dahomey involved significant collection and distribution of gifts and tribute, religious voting ceremonies, military parades, and discussions by dignitaries about the future for the kingdom. In the 1840s, Dahomey began to face decline with British pressure to abolish the slave trade, which included the anti-slavery blockade of Africa by the Royal Navy's West Africa Squadron. Dahomey was also weakened after facing crushing defeats at the hands of Abeokuta, a Yoruba city-state which was founded by the Oyo Empire refugees migrating southward. Dahomey later began experiencing territorial disputes with France, which led to the war in 1890 and part of the kingdom becoming a French protectorate. The kingdom fell 4 years later, when renewed fighting resulted in the last king, Bihanzin, to be overthrown and the country annexed into French West Africa. French Dahomey would gain independence in 1960 as the Republic of Dahomey, which would rename itself Benin in 1975. Edo, officially known as Edo State, is a state in the South-South geopolitical zone of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. As of 2024, the state was ranked as the 20th most populous state, 5,250,000 in Nigeria. The estimated state population is around 4,777,000 in 2021. Edo State is the 21st largest state by landmass in Nigeria. The state's capital and largest city, Benin City, is the fourth largest city in Nigeria and the center of the country's rubber industry. Created in 1991 from the former Bendel state, it is also known as the heartbeat of the nation. Edo State borders Kogi State to the north for 133 kilometers and across the Niger River for 81 kilometers to the northeast, and Ambra State to the east for about 4 km across the Niger River, Delta State to the southeast and south for 350 kilometers, 218 miles, and Ondo State to the west. The modern borders of Edo State encompass regions that were formerly the site of various empires and kingdoms of the Second Dynasty formed in the 11th century AD, the Benin Empire. The ancient city of Edo, the site of modern-day Benin City, was home to some of the largest earthworks in the world. In 1897, the British Empire conducted a punitive expedition of the region, destroying most of the ancient city of Edo and incorporating the territory into what would become the Southern Nigeria Protectorate. Edo State is a diverse state that is predominantly inhabited by the Edoid people, including the Edo or Bini, Ezen, Ora, Akoko-Edo, Ija Awan, and Afamai people, and Igala people among others. The most common Edoid language spoken is the Edo language, which is commonly spoken in Benin City. Christianity is the dominant religion in Edo State. It was first introduced to the region by Portuguese missionaries during the 15th century. Islam and traditional religions are also practiced. The Edo people, also referred to as the Benin people, are an Edoid-speaking ethnic group. They are prominently native to 7 southern local government areas of Edo State, Nigeria. They are speakers of the Edo language and are the descendants of the founders of the Benin Kingdom, Ogiso Igodo. They are closely related to other Edoid ethnic groups, such as the Ezen, the Itsako, the Isoko, and Arobo, as well as other southern ethnic groups. The names Benin and Bini are Portuguese corruptions, ultimately from the word Ubini, which came into use during the reign of Oba ruler Eweka, circa 1440. Ubini is an Edo word meaning livable, used by Pa Edu, the progenitor of the Edo State people, to describe the area found as a livable locale during their sojourn from Lower Egypt. Ubini was later corrupted to Bini by the mixed ethnicities living together at the center, and further corrupted to Benin around 1485, when the Portuguese began trade relations with Oba Eweka, giving them coral beads, which the Edo people call ivory. Legendary origins. The Edo tradition of origin holds that initially there was no land on earth. Accordingly, Osinobwa requested 3 sons to descend from the sky in a canoe. One son, named Igodo, created land by pouring sand contained in a snail shell on the water, and Osinobwa made him king of Edo and of the world. Some traditions say Igodo was thought to have come from the sky due to his great wisdom. Ogiso hence means king from the sky. Early history. Relying on other traditions and archaeological evidence, historians believe that the Edo migrated into Igodagamado from the northeast in the second half of the first millennium CE, intermarrying with the local Ifa people and gradually assimilating them to their culture. Some traditions claim that they stayed temporarily at Ile-Ife before settling their present-day homeland. In Jacob Egarevba's first edition of A Short History of Benin 1934, he says the first Ogiso, Abagodo Igodo, was the eldest son of Oduduwa. His second edition changed to have the Ogiso as having Oduduwa. His second edition changed to have the Ogiso as having migrated from Egypt, likely influenced by the Hamitic hypothesis. The British Empire comprised the dominions, colonies, protectorates, mandates, and other territories ruled or administered by the United Kingdom and its predecessor states. It began with the overseas possessions and trading posts established by England in the late 16th and early 17th centuries and colonization attempts by Scotland during the 17th century. At its height in the 19th and early 20th centuries, it became the largest empire in history and, for a century, was the foremost global power. By 1913, the British Empire held sway over 412 million people, 23% of the world population at the time, and by 1920, it covered 35.5 million square kilometers, 13.7 million square miles, 24% of the Earth's total land area. As a result, its constitutional, legal, linguistic, and cultural legacy is widespread. At the peak of its power, it was described as the empire on which the sun never sets, as the sun was always shining on at least one of its territories. During the Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries, Portugal and Spain pioneered European exploration of the globe and in the process established large overseas empires. Envious of the great wealth these empires generated, England, France, and the Netherlands began to establish colonies and trade networks of their own in the Americas and Asia. A series of wars in the 17th and 18th centuries with the Netherlands and France left Britain the dominant colonial power in North America. Britain became a major power in the Indian subcontinent after the East India Company's conquest of Mughal Bengal at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The American War of Independence resulted in Britain losing some of its oldest and most populous colonies in North America by 1783. While retaining control of British North America, now Canada, and territories in and near the Caribbean and the British West Indies, British colonial expansion turned towards Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. After the defeat of France in the Napoleonic Wars 1803 to 1815, Britain emerged as the principal naval and imperial power of the 19th century and expanded its imperial holdings. It pursued trade concessions in China and Japan and territory in Southeast Asia. The Great Game and Scramble for Africa also ensued. The period of relative peace 1815 to 1914, during which the British Empire became the global hegemon, was later described as Pax Britannica, Latin for British peace. Alongside the formal control that Britain exerted over its colonies, its dominance of much of world trade and of its oceans meant that it effectively controlled the economies of and readily enforced its interests in many regions, such as Asia and Latin America. It also came to dominate the Middle East. Increasing degrees of autonomy were granted to its white settler colonies, some of which were formally reclassified as dominions by the 1920s. By the start of the 20th century, Germany and the United States had begun to challenge Britain's economic lead. Military, economic, and colonial tensions between Britain and Germany were major causes of the First World War, during which Britain relied heavily on its empire. The conflict placed enormous strain on its military, financial, and manpower resources. Although the empire achieved its largest territorial extent immediately after the First World War, Britain was no longer the world's preeminent industrial or military power. In the Second World War, Britain's colonies in East Asia and Southeast Asia were occupied by the Empire of Japan. Despite the final victory of Britain and its allies, the damage to British prestige and the British economy helped accelerate the decline of the empire. India, Britain's most valuable and populous possession, achieved independence in 1947 as part of a larger decolonization movement, in which Britain granted independence to most territories of the empire. The Suez Crisis of 1956 confirmed Britain's decline as a global power, and the handover of Hong Kong to China on July 1, 1997 symbolized for many the end of the British Empire, though 14 overseas territories that are remnants of the empire remain under British sovereignty. After independence, many former British colonies, along with most of the dominions, joined the Commonwealth of Nations, a free association of independent states. 15 of these, including the United Kingdom, retain the same person as monarch, currently King Charles III. The Ogiso were the earliest known ruling monarchy of the Edo Kingdom of Igodo, founded by Igodo, the first Ogiso. The monarchy began around 900 AD and lasted until the early 12th century, when it was succeeded by the Oba monarchy. The Ogiso monarchy influenced the early socio-political structure of the region by introducing centralized governance and laying the foundations for the Benin Empire. Throughout its existence, the Ogiso monarchy had 31 rulers, and notable among them were Ogiso Igodo, the first ruler, and Ogiso heir, who implemented several administrative and cultural reforms. This era saw the establishment of settlements, the integration of various chiefdoms, and the growth of proto-urban centers, with Udo and Benin City being prominent examples. The decline of the Ogiso monarchy began with the rule of the last Ogiso, Owodo, whose reign was marked by internal conflict and public dissatisfaction. This led to his banishment and a period of interregnum, during which the nobleman Evian attempted to establish his own line of succession. However, the people eventually rejected this, inviting a prince from Ife to restore order, thus beginning the Oba monarchy. The legacy of the Ogiso monarchy remains in the cultural and historical consciousness of the Benin people, reflected in their traditions, folklore, and archaeological findings. Oremian, also known as Iranian, was a legendary Yoruba king from the Kingdom of Ile Ife and the founder of the Benin Kingdom and the Oyo Empire. Although he was the youngest of the descendants of Oduduwa, he became the prime heir of Oduduwa upon his return to claim his grandfather's throne. According to early accounts, he founded Oyo as its first Alafin in the year 1300 shortly after establishing a new dynasty in Igotamagodo. Following Oranmiyan's death, his family is fabled to have erected the commemorative stele known as the Staff of Oranmiyan, Oba Ovonramwen in the Yoruba language, at the place where their grandfather died. This obelisk is 5.5 m tall and about 1.2 m in circumference at its base. During a storm in 1884, about 1.2 m was broken off from its top, and it has fallen twice and been re-erected on each occasion. It currently stands in a grove in Mopa, Ile-Ife. Radiocarbon tests have shown that this royal marker was erected centuries before the start of the Oduduwa dynasty. Oduduwa or Ujua was a Yoruba divine king, a creator deity Orisha in the Yoruba religion, and the legendary figure who ushered in the classical period that later led to the foundation of the Ife Empire. His earthly origins are from the village of Oak Ora. According to tradition, he was the holder of the title of the Alafin of Ile-Ife, the Yoruba holy city. He ruled there briefly and also served as the progenitor of a number of independent royal dynasties in Yorubaland, with the praise names Alafin Adimula and Alafin I. Archaeologists and historians estimate Oduduwa's kingly existence to the late formative period of Ife 800–1000 CE, which aligns with indigenous Yoruba oral chronology. However, Yoruba religious adherents take it one step further, explaining spiritually Oduduwa, together with Obatala, are even seen to be aligned with creator divinities cloaked in human form as old as the earth itself, though the spiritual figure Oduduwa is often said to be distinct from the figure who reigned as Alafin. The etymological derivation of the Yoruba name Oduduwa is Odigwa. This translates literally to the great repository which brings forth existence. Height of power. Uwere, also known as Uwere the Great or Uwere I, originally known as Prince Ogun, was the 12th Oba of the Benin Empire from 1440 until 1473. Uwere became king in a violent coup against his brother Eweka, which destroyed much of Benin City. After the war, Uwere rebuilt much of the city of Benin, reformed political structures in the kingdom, greatly expanded the territory of the kingdom, and fostered the arts and festivals. He left a significant legacy in the Kingdom of Benin. Uwere was most likely born in the Benin Royal Palace in Benin City, and he wasn't proclaimed heir. Originally named Prince Ogun, he was an insignificant member of the royal house, even challenged from birth. Uwere's name means the trouble has ceased, referring to when he finally gained the throne after rebelling against Eweka. During his reign, Edo was rebuilt and possibly started the construction of the Benin moats. He was the founder of Benin's Imperial era and expanded the Benin Empire in all directions. He was also the first Oba to meet the Portuguese in 1473. He was a key general and, from oral history, recounted 201 victories against other cities and states. Gaining power after seizing the throne from Eweka in 1440, he reformed the administration of the Benin Empire and transformed it into an imperial state through conquest. He was the first Oba to establish limited trade with the Portuguese in 1473 and gradually began to acquire firearms for the empire. His early reforms and developments are seen as early acts of indigenous modernization in Africa. In 1440, Oba Uwere, also known as Uwere the Great, came to power and expanded the borders of the former city-state. It was only at this time that the administrative center of the kingdom began to be referred to as Ubenu after the Portuguese word and corrupted to Bini by the Itsekiri, Arobo, and Edo, who all lived together in the royal administrative center of the kingdom. The Portuguese who arrived in an expedition led by João Afonso de Aveiro in 1485 would refer to it as Benin, and the center would become known as Benin City. The Oba had become the mount of power within the region. In the 15th century, Oba Uwere is credited with turning Benin City into a city-state from a military fortress built by the Ogisos, protected by moats and walls. It was from this bastion that he launched his military campaigns and began the expansion of the kingdom from the Edo-speaking heartlands. Excavations also uncovered a rural network of earthen walls 6,000 to 13,000 kilometers, 4,000 to 8,000 miles long, that would have taken an estimated 150 million man-hours to build and must have taken hundreds of years to build. These were apparently raised to mark out territories for towns and cities. 13 years after Eweka's death, tales of Benin's splendors lured more Portuguese traders to the city gates. A series of walls marked the incremental growth of the city from 850 AD until its decline in the 16th century. To enclose his palace, he commanded the building of Benin's inner wall, an 11-kilometer-long 7 miles earthen rampart girded by a moat 20 feet deep. This was excavated in the early 1960s by Graham Kana. Kana estimated that its construction, if spread out over 5 dry seasons, would have required a workforce of 1,000 laborers working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. Eweka also added great thoroughfares and erected 9 fortified gateways. Excavations at Benin City have revealed that it was already flourishing around 1200 to 1300 CE. Esigie, also spelt Esigie, originally known as Osa, was the son of Oba Ozolua, who reigned in the late 15th century, and his second wife, Queen Idia. He was the 16th Oba who ruled the medieval Benin Kingdom, now Benin City, Edo State, Nigeria from c. 1504 c. 1550. Works of art commissioned by Esigie are held in prominent museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum. After Ozolua's death, Esigie controlled Benin City, while his brother Arwarin controlled Udo, a town about 30 kilometers 20 miles northwest of Benin City that was nearly its equal in size and influence. Following a bitter power struggle with Arwarin, and with major assistance and support from his mother Idia, Esigie gathered the Benin army at Unuame on the river Asi, and from there launched an attack and overthrew Arwarin. Esigie became Oba of Benin and would later fend off an attack from the Igala people. Esigie started a tradition in Benin by abolishing the killing of the king's mother, giving Idia the title of Ioba or Queen Mother, and providing the Egwi Ioba Palace of the Queen Mother in Lower Usulu for her use. Idia was responsible for many cultural innovations that still hold strong in Benin's cultural history. She notably dressed as a man, marched alongside her son, and led Benin to victory in the Idia Battle of 1515. When Idia died, her protege and Esigie's wife Alaba would go to support the Oba until his death c. 1550. In the early 16th century, Oba Esigie expanded the kingdom eastwards, after defeating an invasion and attempted conquest of Benin by the Igala kingdom. Benin gained political strength and ascendancy over much of what is now Midwestern Nigeria. Its wealth grew through its extensive trade, especially with the interior of the region, although the trade with Europeans that developed from the late 15th century onwards in pepper, slaves, cloth, and ivory provided a smaller, additional supplement to Benin's wealth, its economy, its technology, and art. Rhineland brass manila bracelets, offered by Portuguese merchants for ivory, peppers, and slaves from 1507 AD, have been found to be the metallic base for the Benin Bronzes. A few of the cast plaques depict the Portuguese merchants, manillas, and the weapons offered as trade goods. A Benin bronze depicts a Portuguese merchant with brass manillas in the background. Benin ruled over the tribes of the Niger Delta, including the Western Igbo tribes, Ijaw, Itchikiri, Isoko, and Orobo, amongst others. It also held sway over the eastern Yoruba tribes of Ondo, Ekiti, Mahin/Ugbo, Hausa, Fulani, and Ijebu. At its height in the 16th century, Benin dominated trade along the entire coastline from the western Niger Delta, through Lagos reaching almost Accra in the west. Idia was the mother of Esigie, who reigned as Oba king of the Edo people from 1504 to 1550. Historians are uncertain as regards her period of life. They do know that Idia was alive during the Ida War 1515 to 1516 because she played a role that led to a great Benin victory. It has been argued that Idia, therefore, was the true power behind the throne of her son. She played a significant role in the rise and reign of the king, being described as a great warrior who fought relentlessly before and during her son's reign as the Oba king of the Edo people. Queen Idia was instrumental in securing the title of Oba for her son Esigie following the death of his father Oba Ozolua. To that end, she raised an army to fight off his brother Arwarin, who was supposed to be the Oba by right and tradition, but who was subsequently defeated in battle. Esigie's mother became the first Ioba of Benin. Idia first entered the royal household because Ozolua, the Oba from 1483 until 1514, saw her dance, and after the dance wanted to make her his wife. Idia and the Oba were married sometime before 1504, but historians are not positive about the exact date. As a result, Idia's parents helped prepare her for her future life in the palace by giving her certain medical herbs. She was known to be very intelligent because she was able to retrieve the throne for her son, and was also able to protect Esigie from his enemies such as Arwahan, Esigie's half-brother. Another interesting concept Idia was known for was her womb of Oru, a phrase that meant that her womb defied the odds. These odds were that her son, Esigie, was not first in line for the throne, rather Esigie was originally third in line for the throne. In the end, and against the odds, Esigie became the Oba. Ajadogbo, the first in line for the throne as Oba, became an illegitimate candidate for the throne because he was crippled due to playing with his brothers, Arwahan and Esigie. The people of Benin thought that Idia had planned this because Idia was known to possess magical powers. This also shows how the people of Benin thought that she was able to both evade and create havoc. This resulted in Arwahan being next in line for the throne, but he saw Esigie as a threat. Consequently, Esigie wanted to assassinate his half-brother. Although, the only reason Arwahan did not assassinate his brother was because he knew that Esigie's mother, Idia, had the skill of magical arts, while Arwahan did not. There have been many representations of Queen Idia because she represented a key part of Benin's imperial courtly culture. Also, Idia was so influential because of her determination. Overall, she was described as a strong-willed, beautiful, intelligent, and wise woman. Esigie instituted the title of Ioba, mother of the monarch, and conferred it on his mother, along with the Egwi Ioba, palace of the Queen Mother. Queen Idia became more popular in contemporary Nigeria when it was decided that her face should be used as a sculpture to represent a Nigerian festival, Festac 77. The face of the Queen Mother came into the art world more after this. She was supposed to be killed after the crowning of her son as the Oba, according to the then tradition, but her son Esigie secretly took her to hide in a room that was to be entered by only those authorized to do so. He did this in order to protect her from being killed, and it worked until he was able to alter the tradition. After he canceled the law concerning royal matricide, Queen Idia returned freely to the palace and ruled together with her son, helping him fight spiritually and physically over his enemies, which helped him during his reign as Oba. Before she died, she trained her son's wife in her ways so her departure would be met unnoticed. Benin Ivory Mask. The Benin Ivory Mask is a miniature sculptural portrait in ivory of Idia, the first Ioba, Queen Mother, of the 16th century Benin Empire, taking the form of a traditional African mask. The masks were looted by the British from the palace of the Oba of Benin in the Benin Expedition of 1897. Two almost identical masks are kept at the British Museum in London and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Both feature a serene face of the Queen Mother wearing a beaded headdress, a beaded choker at her neck, scarification highlighted by iron inlay on the forehead, all framed by the flange of an openwork tiara and collar of symbolic beings, as well as double loops at each side for attachment of the pendant. Until its restitution in 2022 to Nigeria, the Linden Museum in Germany had such a mask in its collection. Further, there are also similar masks at the Seattle Art Museum and one in a private collection. The British Museum example in particular has also become a cultural emblem of modern Nigeria since Festac 77, a major Pan-African cultural festival held in Lagos, Nigeria in 1977, which chose as its official emblem a replica of the mask crafted by Herbert Emakpi. Benin Empire. In the early 16th century, the dynamic Esigie ruled the Benin Empire of the Edo people as its Oba. He came to power as Portuguese explorers first made contact with the empire. The empire traded pepper, ivory, local textiles, and slaves for brass and coral beads. Esigie engaged in two major conflicts. First, his half-brother fought a protracted civil war over the line of succession that would crown Esigie, the firstborn. Second, Esigie successfully defended against an invasion from the northern Igala kingdom and captured their leader. Esigie rewarded his key political and mystical advisor during these trials, his mother Idia, with the title of Ioba, Queen Mother, the first in a tradition of Queen Mother advisors. The identification with Idia was made by Oba Esigie II in the mid-20th century. Ritual use. The Oba of Benin commissioned works from his guild of ivory and wood carvers, the Oba Ovonramwen. Their works were customized for their ruler, between the material connotations of ivory and the visual motifs in the carvings. At least two of the masks feature Portuguese imagery, although this imagery outlasted the actual Portuguese presence, and thus were likely created during Esigie's early 16th century rule, possibly c. 1520, either during Idia's life or soon after her death. The similarities between the masks indicate that they were likely created at the same time by the same artist. Their details match the comparable carving qualities of ivory spoons and salt cellars commissioned during the same period. The early period of Benin art, the phase of strongest affiliation with Ife or Yoruba art. Ivory works from Benin were mainly for the Oba to use in ritual. The masks may have been used in ceremonies including the Uji Ioba commemoration of the Oba's mother, as well the Imobo purification ceremony to expel bad spirits from the land. Similar pendant masks are mainly used in contemporary Imobo ceremonies focused on bad spirits, though the traditions of Imobo may have changed throughout history. For rungs on the side of the masks, above and below each ear, let the masks hang in suspension and indicate that the masks were suspended from a cord, though experts have disagreed on how they were worn. British Museum art historian William Fagg concluded that unlike the small brass pendant masks worn at the waist by modern kings, the ivory mask was likely worn around the neck. An 1830s drawing of a similar mask worn at the breast by a neighboring ruler confirms Fagg's theory. Based on the position of the rungs, Metropolitan curator Elisa Lagema also affirmed the theory. Benin specialist and anthropologist Paula Benamis, however, wrote that the masks were worn on the waist as pendants during the Uji Ioba and Imobo ceremonies. The hollow masks likely served as amuletic containers. Below the mask's collars, the rings of small loops are attachment points for crotal bells. Civil War. Ruling in the late 16th century, Oba Esigie was the last of the warrior kings. After his reign, the empire gradually shrank in size, losing control over territories in the west. The end of his reign saw a rise in the power of prominent officials, and during the following decades many Obas enjoyed short and turbulent reigns as various branches of the royal family fought for position. The death of Oba Ovonramwen in 1641 may have marked the end of the direct father-to-son line of succession going back to Eweka. Officials also increasingly controlled the military and trade, as cloth came to replace the previously dominant pepper and ivory as trade commodities. A civil war broke out around 1689, around the time that Oba Eweka ascended to the throne. Ode and lower-ranked members of the royal administration revolted against their superiors' attempts to control them. The Oba brought in troops from another city but could not defeat the rebels, and Benin City was sacked. The war continued for roughly 10 years before negotiations brought them to an end. Eweka's succession, however, was disputed between his two sons Ozolua and Ozolua. Ozolua and his close ally, a traditional chief who bore the title Azomo, eventually prevailed over the younger Ozolua and his ally, the Ode in a decisive battle in 1721. Cleanup and reconquest of rebel areas, however, took another 10 years. With renewed stability in the kingdom, Oba Esigie benefited from trade with Europeans and was to be one of the richest Obas in the kingdom's history. Eweka I, reigned 1200 AD, 1235 AD, was the first Oba of Benin and presided over the kingdom's shift from the Ogiso monarchy to the establishment of the Obaship. His 35-year reign had a notable impact on the political, cultural, and traditional aspects of the kingdom. Before Eweka I's rule, the Benin kingdom faced uncertainty due to the banishment of Owodo, the last Ogiso, for misrule. Odujawa, who was the father of Oromian, had been exiled to Uhi, Ife, which eventually set the stage for Eweka I's ascension to power. The turning point occurred when Odujawa sent his son, Oromian, to Benin as an emissary. Oromian's arrival was met with resistance, leading to his settlement in Usuma, on the outskirts of Benin City. To gauge the loyalty of the Benin people, Oromian challenged them to care for a common louse for 3 years, symbolizing their commitment to their potential king. Oromian resided in a palace constructed for him within the city of Benin. During his time there, he entered into matrimony with an Edo woman by the name of Wind. Their union bore fruit in the form of a son, who was christened Eweka. Despite the successful completion of this task by the Benin people, Ovonramwen recognized the importance of a ruler deeply rooted in Benin culture. He relinquished his claim to the throne, highlighting the need for a monarch well-versed in Benin traditions, ultimately paving the way for Eweka's reign. Eweka's rule marked the establishment of the Obaship in Benin, with the term Oba beginning to signify kingship during his time. He emphasized the significance of rulers educated in Benin culture, a principle that persisted over the centuries. Following Eweka's death in 1235 AD, his legacy became an integral part of the Benin kingdom's identity, influencing its governance, traditions, and cultural heritage. Britain seeks control over trade. Benin's economy was thriving in the early to mid-19th century with the development of the trade in palm oil and the continuation of the trade in textiles, ivory, and other resources. To preserve the kingdom's independence, the Oba gradually banned the export of goods from Benin until the trade was exclusively in palm oil. By the latter half of the 19th century, Britain desired a closer relationship with the Kingdom of Benin, as British officials were increasingly interested in controlling trade in the area and in accessing the kingdom's palm oil, kola nut, ivory, and potentially rubber resources, following the introduction of Hevea brasiliensis saplings via Kew Gardens in 1895. Several attempts were made to achieve this, beginning with the official visit of Richard Francis Burton in 1862 when he was consul at Fernandope. Following that came attempts to establish a treaty between Benin and the United Kingdom by Hewitt, Blair, and Annesley in 1884, 1885, and 1886 respectively. However, these efforts did not yield any results. The kingdom resisted becoming a British protectorate throughout the 1880s, but the British remained persistent. Progress was made in 1892 during the visit of Vice-Consul Henry Galway. This mission was the first official visit after Burton's. Moreover, it would also set in motion the events to come that would lead to Oba Ovonramwen's fall from power. The Galway Treaty of 1892. In the late 19th century, the Kingdom of Benin managed to retain its independence, and the Oba exercised a monopoly over trade, which British merchants in the region found irksome. The territory was coveted by an influential group of investors for its rich natural resources, such as palm oil and ivory. After British consul Richard Burton visited Benin in 1862, he wrote of Benin's as a place of gratuitous barbarity which stinks of death, a narrative which was publicized in Britain and increased support for the territory's colonization. In spite of this, the kingdom maintained its independence and was not visited by another representative of Britain until 1892 when Henry Galway, the British vice-consul of the Oil Rivers Protectorate, later the Niger Coast Protectorate, visited Benin City hoping to open up trade and ultimately annex Benin Kingdom and transform it into a British protectorate. Galway was able to get Omo and Oba Ovonramwen and his chiefs to sign a treaty which gave Britain legal justification for exerting greater influence over the empire. While the treaty itself contains text suggesting Ovonramwen sought Benin to become a protectorate, this was contrasted by Galway's own account, which suggests the Oba was hesitant to sign the treaty. Although some suggest that humanitarian motivations were driving Britain's actions, letters written between colonial administrators suggest that economic motivations were predominant. The treaty itself does not explicitly mention anything about Benin's bloody customs that Burton had written about, and instead only includes a vague clause about ensuring the general progress of civilization. Ovonramwen. Oba Ovonramwen Nagbesai, also called Ovonramwen, was the 35th Oba of the Kingdom of Benin reigning from c. 1888, c. 1897, up until the British punitive expedition. Born circa 1857, he was the son of Oba Ozolua. He took the name Ovonramwen Nagbesai at his enthronement in 1888. Every Oba took a new name at his coronation, Ovonramwen meaning the rising sun, and Nagbesai meaning which spreads over all. At the end of the 19th century, the Kingdom of Benin had managed to retain its independence, and the Oba exercised a monopoly over trade which the British found irksome. The territory was coveted by an influential group of investors for its rich natural resources such as palm oil, rubber, and ivory. However, Slavery played a critical role in the rise of Benin, with Oba Ovonramwen Nagbasai representing the pinnacle of the kingdom's human exploitation. The kingdom was largely independent of British control, and pressure continued from figures such as Vice-Consul James Robert Phillips and Captain Henry Galway, the British Vice-Consul of Oil Rivers Protectorate, who were pushing for British annexation of the Benin Empire and the removal of the Oba. The Massacre of 1897. A British delegation departed from the Oil Rivers Protectorate in 1897 with the stated aim of negotiating with the Oba of Benin regarding the trade agreement, which they felt he was not keeping. The leader of the delegation, James Robert Phillips, had asked his superiors in the British Foreign Office for permission to lead an armed British expedition to depose the Oba of Benin not long before the expedition, but left for Benin City with a diplomatic delegation, or a reconnaissance mission disguised as a peaceful diplomatic delegation, before receiving a reply to his request. Perceiving this to be an attempt to depose the Oba's generals unilaterally ordered an attack on the delegation as it was approaching Benin City, which included 8 unknowing British representatives and hundreds of African porters and laborers, all but 2 of whom were killed. A punitive expedition was launched in response, and a 1,200-men-strong force, under the command of Sir Harry Rawson, captured Benin City. They deliberately sought out and destroyed certain areas of the city, including those thought to belong to the chiefs responsible for the ambush of the British delegation, and in the process of fire burnt the palace and surrounding quarters, which the British claimed was accidental. There is much debate of why James Phillips set out on the mission to Benin without much weaponry. Some have argued he was going on a peaceful mission. Such commentators argue that the message from the Oba that his festival would not permit him to receive European visitors touched the humanitarian side of Phillips's character because of an incorrect assumption that the festival included human sacrifice. Igbafe also points to Phillips' November 1896 advocacy of military force regarding Benin, arguing that this is inconsistent with the perception of Phillips as a man of peace in January 1897. Igbafe posits that Phillips was going on a reconnaissance mission and that Phillips' haste to Benin can be explained by a belief that nothing bad would happen to him or his party. The expeditionary force also took the palace art as war booty. The looted portrait figures, busts, and groups created in iron, carved ivory, and especially in brass, conventionally termed the Benin Bronzes, were sold off to defray the cost of the expedition, and some were accessioned to the British Museum. Most were sold elsewhere and are now on display in various museums around the world. Post-1897. The British occupied Benin, which was absorbed into the British Niger Coast Protectorate and eventually into British colonial Nigeria. A general emancipation of slaves followed in the wake of British occupation, but Britain also imposed a system of forced labor in Benin and in surrounding areas, as they did throughout other parts of southern Nigeria. The British launched an additional operation in 1899 called the Benin Territories Expedition against rebels still holding out against the British. The British burnt down numerous towns and destroyed farms in an attempt to starve the rebels into submission. After the 1899 expedition, military resistance in the former Kingdom of Benin against the British occupation ceased. Oba Ovonramwen died in exile in Calabar in January 1914. His son Oba Esigie was enthroned as Oba on July 24, taking the regnal name Eweka II. His coronation coincided with a shift in British policy towards indirect rule, and so he was allowed to return to Benin. Eweka II rebuilt the royal palace, which had been destroyed in 1897. He also re-established the traditional officers of the kingdom, restored the craft guilds, commissioned objects to replace those looted by the British, and started the Benin Arts and Crafts School. Eweka II's rule marked Benin's transition to a non-sovereign monarchy within first colonial and then independent Nigeria. His successors have played important roles mediating political disputes and working towards the return of the looted Benin Bronzes. In March 2021, institutions in Berlin, Germany, and Aberdeen, Scotland announced decisions to return Benin Bronzes in their possession to their place of origin. Ozolua. Ozolua, originally known as Prince Okpame, was the 15th Oba of the Kingdom of Benin who reigned from c. 1483 AD, c. 1504 AD. He greatly expanded the kingdom through warfare and increased contact with the Portuguese Empire. and was later called Ozolua Inabaromi, meaning Ozolua the Conqueror in Edo. He was an important Oba in the history of the Kingdom of Benin and retains importance in the folklore and celebrations of the region. Prince Okpame was the third and the youngest son of Eweka, who had significantly expanded the Kingdom of Benin during his reign from 1440 until 1473. Following the death of Eweka, his eldest surviving son, Esi, was assassinated by a poison arrow at his coronation, and his second oldest son, Olua, ruled with significant domestic descent for 7 years. After a short-lived rule of the kingdom by a collection of chieftains, Prince Okpame was named the Oba in 1483 after a 3-year interregnum and took the name Ozolua. His rule was defined largely by significant military expansion of the Kingdom of Benin. This included a successful attack against the Kingdom of Owo. While historical accounts of the battle differ, the result left Owo with its independence while still requiring that it pay tribute to Benin. In diplomatic exchanges with the Portuguese, he claimed to have been victorious in over 200 battles. These victories earned him the title Ozolua Inabaromi, meaning Ozolua the Conqueror in Edo, and in statues and artwork he is often displayed as a great warrior. It is difficult to date the alleged migrations from Benin, but there is a strong belief that the founder of Ora was a son of Oba Ozolua, who was reigning in 1485. The founders of several other tribes are said to have come at the same time, although limited trade and contact with the Portuguese had begun under his father Eweka. The contact expanded significantly under Ozolua, with Portuguese explorer John Alfonso de Aveiro entering the capital Benin City in 1485 and accompanying Ozolua, although not participating in war. Ozolua was intrigued by the possibilities of firearms for expansion of the kingdom, but was informed by de Aveiro that firearm trade was only possible with Christian allies of the Portuguese. As a result, Ozolua sent an ambassador to Portugal in the early 1500s to propose missionary activity in the kingdom and a royal conversion to Christianity in exchange for trade in firearms. At least one source indicates that he himself went to Portugal at some point. The Portuguese did not agree, but did send a group of missionaries to the kingdom in 1514. The missionaries soon left, as the kingdom was not interested in Christianity unless this was coupled to the facilitation of trade in firearms. Esigie. Esigie, also spelt Esigie, originally known as Osa, was the son of Oba Ozolua, who reigned in the late 15th century, and his second wife, Queen Idia. He was the 16th Oba who ruled the medieval Benin Kingdom, now Benin City, Edo State, Nigeria from c. 1504 c. 1550. Works of art commissioned by Esigie are held in prominent museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum. After Ozolua's death, Esigie controlled Benin City, while his brother Arwaran controlled Udo, a town about 30 kilometers, 20 miles, northwest of Benin City that was nearly its equal in size and influence. Following a bitter power struggle with Arwaran, and with major assistance and support from his mother Idia, Esigie gathered the Benin army at Unuame on the river Asi, and from there launched an attack and overthrew Arwaran. Esigie became Oba of Benin and would later fend off an attack from the Igala people. Esigie started a tradition in Benin by abolishing the killing of the king's mother, giving Idia the title of Ioba, or Queen Mother, and providing the Egwi Ioba, Palace of the Queen Mother, in Lower Usulu for her use. Idia was responsible for many cultural innovations that still hold strong in Benin's cultural history. She notably dressed as a man marched alongside her son and led Benin to victory in the Idia Battle of 1515. When Idia died, her protege and Esigie's wife Alaba would go to support the Oba until his death c. 1550. Imoten, FL 1440 to 1473, was a market woman who traded in foodstuffs around the Oba market in the ancient Benin Kingdom during the reign of Oba Eweka and Prince Ogun, who later took the name Oba Eweka the Great after becoming the Oba of Benin. She is the pioneer of the first daycare center in Benin City. Oral history said she assisted Oba Eweka in reclaiming the throne as Oba of Benin after several years in exile. Imoten, real name Ewere, was born in Ayan between 1380 and 1400. After the death of her husband, she constructed a hut where she attended to the needs of children. Imoten was instrumental in Ewere's reclaiming the throne as Oba of Benin after she told him of a murder plot against him made by Eweka and some chiefs during his time in exile. Ewere went on to appoint Imoten as the Ieke English leader of the authorized Ikpate Guild, a position given to someone with the task of enforcing market rules and checkmating security matters. Imoten was a trader who sold her wares at the exact point where her statue now stands. She was historically credited with setting up the first primary school in the kingdom and saving the monarchy during one of its lowest moments. She helped the Oba Ewere in reclaiming the throne from his usurper brother, Oba Eweka, who reigned about 1432 AD. Queen Iden is yet another heroine whose sacrifice helped shape the Benin kingdom. She was the queen during the reign of Oba Upape in about 1700 AD. She is known to have volunteered herself as a sacrificial lamb for the welfare of her husband and that of the entire kingdom after she consulted the oracle and was informed that human sacrifice would be needed to appease the gods and restore peace and unity in the kingdom. Asoro, also known as General Asoro, was a war chief in the Kingdom of Benin who served as the sword-bearer to Oba Ovonramwen during the 1897 British expedition to Benin. He participated in the defense of Benin against the British expeditionary force that aimed to capture the Oba. Asoro's statement that no other person should pass this road except the Oba, Sokpan Oba, resulted in a road in Benin being named Sikpanba. General Asoro was from Igwogo, located in the present-day Ovia Northeast local government area of Edo State. In January 1897, during a religious festival, a British expedition led by acting James Robert Phillips attempted to enter Benin without Oba Ovonramwen's permission. Asoro and other warriors resisted the British officials, forcing them to retreat and killing some of them. This incident heightened tensions between the British and Benin. The British officials claimed they wanted to discuss trade issues, but their unauthorized entry and the subsequent violence led to further conflicts. After the British defeated the Benin Empire and captured Oba, King Ovonramwen, Asoro refused to accept the exile order. During the British attack on Benin led by James Robert Phillips, Asoro protected the road used by the British force, declaring that only the Oba could use that road, which was later named Sikpanba. A statue of General Asoro stands on this road in Benin City to honor his actions. General Asoro the warrior was the sword-bearer to King Ovonramwen, the Oba of Benin, in 1897. He participated in the defense of Benin during the 1897 expedition, engaging the British expeditionary force sent to capture the Oba. A quote uttered by the general that no other person should dare pass this road except the Oba, Sokpan Oba, was later translated to Sikpanba, which a well-known road in Benin was named after. Chief Oba Esigie was not just an outstanding Benin warrior of old who defended the kingdom against external invasion, but also a talented blacksmith and sculptor. Human sacrifice. Many 19th-century reports by European travelers and colonizers emphasized the practice of juju human sacrifice in Benin, and these have colored later scholarly works on the kingdom. From the early days, human sacrifices were a part of the state religion. But many of the accounts of the sacrifices, says historian J. D. Graham, are exaggerated or based on rumor and speculation. He says that all of the evidence points to a limited, ritual custom of human sacrifice. Many of the written accounts referring to the human sacrifices describe them as actually being executed criminals. 41 female skeletons thrown into a pit were discovered by the archaeologist Graham Khanna in the 1960s. He interpreted these findings as showing that human sacrifice or execution of criminals took place in Benin in the 13th century AD. The skeletons show no signs of violence, however, and may instead be a mass grave from a bubonic plague outbreak. Edo historian Professor Philip Igbafe states that in pre-colonial Benin, the tradition was that only slaves could be sacrificed. This could include hardened criminals and those who had committed serious crimes, who would either be executed or sold into slavery. Sacrifices were made at the anniversary of the Oba's father, at the annual bead ceremony, and to propitiate the gods when poor weather threatened crops or when an epidemic threatened. In addition, the threat of a major calamity or national disaster was also an occasion for sacrifices. Humans were sacrificed in an annual ritual in honor of the god of iron. where warriors from Benin City would perform an acrobatic dance while suspended from the trees. The ritual recalled a mythical war against the sky. Sacrifices of a man, a woman, a goat, a cow, and a ram were also made to a god called the King of Death. The god, named Ojuwu, was worshipped at a special altar in the center of Benin City. There were two separate annual series of rites that honored past Obas. Sacrifices were performed every fifth day. At the end of each series of rites, the current Oba's deceased father was honored with a public festival. During the festival, 12 criminals, chosen from a prison where the worst criminals were held, were sacrificed. By the end of the 18th century, 3 to 4 people were sacrificed at the mouth of the Benin River annually to attract European trade, according to one source. Burials. The monarchy of Benin was hereditary. The eldest son was to become the new Oba. In order to validate the succession of the kingship, the eldest son had to bury his father and perform elaborate rituals. If the eldest son failed to complete these tasks, he might be disqualified from becoming king. Separation of son and mother. After the son was installed as king, his mother, after having been invested with the title of Ioba, was transferred to a palace just outside Benin City, in a place called Usulu. The mother held a considerable amount of power. She was, however, never allowed to meet her son, who was now a divine ruler again. Divinity of the Oba. In Benin, the Oba was seen as divine. The Oba's divinity and sacredness was the focal point of the kingship. The Oba was shrouded in mystery. He only left his palace on ceremonial occasions. It was previously punishable by death to assert that the Oba performed human acts, such as eating, sleeping, dying, or washing. The Oba was also credited with having magical powers. He also controlled a powerful bureaucratic apparatus whose decrees obeyed to the letter. Architecture. The impluvium was used in Benin architecture to store rainwater. Among the residences of the nobility, a compluvium channeled the rainwater into the impluvium in order to permit light and air through the walls since windows were absent among these structures. The stored rainwater in the impluvium was discharged out of the house through a drainage system beneath the floor. Archaeological works from the mid-20th century have revealed the existence of edge-laid potsherd pavements in Benin City, dated around or prior to the 14th century. The walls of Benin are a series of earthworks made up of banks and ditches, called Idia in the Edo language in the area around present-day Benin City, the capital of present-day Edo, Nigeria. They consist of 15 kilometers, 9.3 miles, of city Idia and an estimated 16,000 kilometers, 9,900 miles, in the rural area around Benin. Some estimates suggest that the walls of Benin may have been constructed between the 13th and mid-15th century CE, and others suggest that the walls of Benin, in the Ezen region, may have been constructed during the first millennium AD. City walls. The Benin Moat, Edo, Iyanuwo, also known as the Benin Idia, or Walls of Benin, are a series of massive earthworks encircling Benin City in Nigeria's Edo state. These moats have deep historical roots, with evidence suggesting their existence before the establishment of the Oba monarchy. Construction began around 800 AD and continued until 1460 AD, involving large-scale manual labor and the repurposing of earth from the inner ditch to build the outer berm. Some traditional sources claim that these earthworks spanned approximately 16,000 kilometers, 9,900 miles, enclosing about 6,500 square kilometers, 2,500 square miles, of land, but very little remains today. The Benin moats served as defensive structures, with steep banks and a berm to deter invaders. Access to the city was controlled through 9 gates. Today, remnants of the moats can still be found in Benin City, although urbanization and land disputes pose challenges to their preservation. Recognized for their historical significance, the Benin Moat was added as an extension to the existing World Heritage Site of the Royal Palaces of Abumi in 1995, though still awaiting official recognition by UNESCO, and was acknowledged by the Guinness Book of World Records in 1974 as one of the world's largest man-made structures by length, second only to China's Great Wall. It was described by Alfred Dapper in his book Description of Africa in 1668 as the Great Walls of Benin. The Benin city walls have been known to Westerners since around 1500. Around 1500, the Portuguese explorer Duarte Pacheco Pereira briefly described the walls during his travels. In Pereira's Esmeralda de Situ Orbis, 1505, we read, "The houses are built of sun-dried bricks covered with palm leaves. Benin, which is 80 leagues long by 40 leagues broad, is always at war with its neighbors from whom it obtains captives, whom we buy at from 12 to 15 brass or copper manillas." Another description given around 1600, 100 years after Pereira's description, is by the Dutch explorer Dirk Reuters. Pereira's account of the walls is as follows. "This city is about a league long from gate to gate. It has no wall, but is surrounded by a large moat, very wide and deep, which suffices for its defense." The archaeologist Graham Kana suggests that Pereira was probably mistaken with his description by saying that there was no wall. Kana says, Pereira considered that a bank of earth was not a wall in the sense of the Europe of his day. Reuters' account of the walls is as follows. "At the gate where I entered on horseback, I saw a very high bulwark, very thick of earth, with a very deep broad ditch, but it was dry and full of high trees. That gate is a reasonably good gate, made of wood in their manner, which is to be shut, and there is always a watchholder." Benin, in 1897. Estimates for the initial construction of the walls range from the first millennium to the mid-15th century. According to Kana, oral tradition and travelers' accounts suggest a construction date of 1450 to 1500. It has been estimated that assuming a 10-hour workday, a labor force of 5,000 men could have completed the walls within 97 days, or by 2,421 men in 200 days. However, these estimates have been criticized for not taking into account the time it would have taken to extract the earth from an ever-deepening hole and the time it would have taken to heap the earth into a high bank. It is unknown whether slavery or some other type of labor was used in the construction of the walls. The walls were built of a ditch and dike structure. The ditch dug to form an inner moat with the excavated earth used to form the exterior rampart. The Benin walls were partially demolished by the British in 1897 during their 1897 punitive expedition. Scattered pieces of the structure remain in Edo, with the vast majority of them being used by the locals for building purposes. What remains of the wall itself continues to be torn down for real estate developments in Nigeria. Fred Pierce wrote in New Scientist, "They extend for some 16,000 kilometers in all, in a mosaic of more than 500 interconnected settlement boundaries. They cover 2,510 square miles, 6,500 square kilometers, and were all dug by the Edo people. In all, they are 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China and consumed 100 times more material than the Great Pyramid of Cheops. They took an estimated 150 million hours of digging to construct and are perhaps the largest single archaeological phenomenon on the planet." Ethnomathematician Ron Eglash has discussed the plan layout of the city using fractals as the basis, not only in the city itself and the villages, but even in the rooms of houses. He commented that, when Europeans first came to Africa, they considered the architecture very disorganized and thus primitive. It never occurred to them that the Africans might have been using a form of mathematics that they hadn't even discovered yet. Military operations relied on a well-trained, disciplined force. At the head of the host stood the Oba of Benin. The monarch of the realm served as supreme military commander. Beneath him were subordinate generalissimos, the Izomo, the Ias, and others who supervised a metropolitan regiment based in the capital, and a royal regiment made up of hand-picked warriors that also served as bodyguards. Benin's queen mother, the Ioba, also retained her own regiment, the Queen's Own. The metropolitan and royal regiments were relatively stable semi-permanent or permanent formations. The village regiments provided the bulk of the fighting force and were mobilized as needed, sending contingents of warriors upon the command of the king and his generals. Formations were broken down into subunits under designated commanders. Foreign observers often commented favorably on Benin's discipline and organization as better disciplined than any other Guinea nation, contrasting them with the slacker troops from the Gold Coast. Until the introduction of guns in the 15th century, traditional weapons like the spear, short sword, and bow held sway. Efforts were made to reorganize a local guild of blacksmiths in the 18th century to manufacture light firearms, but dependence on imports was still heavy. Before the coming of the gun, guilds of blacksmiths were charged with war production, particularly swords and iron spearheads. In addition, crossbowmen formed a specialized unit of the Benin army. Archers and crossbowmen were trained in target and field archery. In 1514 or 1516, the Oba of Benin seized a Portuguese bombard for use. Benin's tactics were well organized, with preliminary plans weighed by the Oba and his subcommanders. Logistics were organized to support missions from the usual porter forces, water transport via canoe, and requisitioning from localities the army passed through. Movement of troops via canoes was critically important in the lagoons, creeks, and rivers of the Niger Delta, a key area of Benin's domination. Tactics in the field seemed to have evolved over time. While the head-on clash was well known, documentation from the 18th century shows greater emphasis on avoiding continuous battle lines and more effort to encircle an enemy, Ifianyako. Fortifications were important in the region, and numerous military campaigns fought by Benin's soldiers revolved around sieges. Benin's military earthworks are the largest of such structures in the world, and Benin's rivals also built extensively. Barring a successful assault, most sieges were resolved by a strategy of attrition, slowly cutting off and starving out the enemy fortification until it capitulated. On occasion, however, European mercenaries were called on to aid with these sieges. In 1603-04, for example, European cannon helped batter and destroy the gates of a town near present-day Lagos, allowing 10,000 warriors of Benin to enter and conquer it. As payment, the Europeans received items such as palm oil and bundles of pepper. The example of Benin shows the power of indigenous military systems, but also the role outside influences and new technologies brought to bear. This is a normal pattern among many nations. European contact. The first European travelers to reach Benin were Portuguese explorers under João Afonso de Aveiro in about 1485. A strong mercantile relationship developed, with the Edo trading slaves and tropical products such as ivory, pepper, and palm oil for European goods such as manillas and guns. In the early 16th century, the Obas sent an ambassador to Lisbon, and the King of Portugal sent Christian missionaries to Benin City. Some residents of Benin City could still speak Pidgin Portuguese in the late 19th century. The first English expedition to Benin was in 1553, and significant trading developed between Europe and Benin based on the export of ivory, palm oil, pepper, and later slaves. Visitors in the 16th and 19th centuries brought back to Europe tales of Great Benin, a fabulous city of noble buildings, ruled over by a powerful king. A fanciful engraving of the settlement was made by a Dutch illustrator and was shown in Alfred Dapper's Nakarij Beschrijving der Afrikaanse Guizen, published in Amsterdam in 1668. The work states the following about the royal palace. The king's court is square and located on the right-hand side of the city, as one enters it through the gate of Gatan. It is about the same size as the city of Haarlem and entirely surrounded by a special wall, comparable to the one which encircles the town. It is divided into many magnificent palaces, houses, and apartments of the courtiers, and comprises beautiful and long squares with galleries, about as large as the Exchange at Amsterdam. The buildings are of different sizes, however, resting on wooden pillars, from top to bottom lined with copper casts, on which pictures of their war exploits and battles are engraved. All of them are being very well maintained. Most of the buildings within this court are covered with palm leaves, instead of with square planks, and every roof is adorned with a small spired tower, on which cast copper birds are standing, being very artfully sculpted and lifelike with their wings spread. Another Dutch traveler, David van Nyendel, visited Benin in 1699 and also wrote an account of the kingdom. Nyendel's description was published in 1704 as an appendix to Willem Bosman's Nakurij Beschrijving van de Guineas Goud Tand and Slavekust. In his description, Nyendel states the following about the character of the Benin people. The inhabitants of the Benin are in general a kind and polite people, of whom one with kindness might get everything he desires. Whatever might be offered to them out of politeness will always be doubled in return. However, they want their politeness to be returned with likewise courtesy as well, without the appearance of any disappointment or rudeness, and rightly so. To be sure, trying to take anything from them with force or violence would be as if one tries to reach out to the moon and will never be left unreckoned. When it comes to trade, they are very strict and will not suffer the slightest infringement of their customs. Not even an iota can be changed. Though, when one is willing to accept these customs, they are very easygoing and will cooperate in every way possible to reach an agreement. British trader James Pinnock, who visited the kingdom, writes that he saw a large number of men all handcuffed and chained, with their ears cut off with a razor. T.B. Ochterlony describes the approach to the capital through an avenue of trees hung with decomposing human remains. After the lane of horrors came a grass common, thickly strewn with the skulls and bones of sacrificed human beings. The historian James D. Graham, in his article The Slave Trade, Depopulation and Human Sacrifice in Benin History, 1965, has shown that the area where the skulls and bones of human beings were concentrated, called a Golgotha by a few European visitors, was actually a place where the bodies of dead and executed criminals were deposited, as noted by Captain H.L. Galway, who visited Benin in the 1890s. Galway in 1893 stated that the king is all-powerful, though he would appear to be somewhat in the hands of his big men and very much tied down by fetish customs. He also observed that the Golgotha was really the place where all criminals' bodies were deposited. Scientific analysis of the brass, or bronze, used to make the famous Benin plaques and other sculptures found that, beginning in the late 15th century, the metal, previously thought to have come from the Netherlands, began to derive from the Rhineland region of Germany. At that time, the brass was exported from Germany in the form of ring-shaped ingots, which were used as currency in the transatlantic slave trade, bought from the Portuguese and incorporated by the people in Benin as a metal source in sculpture, and subsequently melted down in Benin to produce Benin Bronzes. Imagine a city with walls longer than the Great Wall of China. A kingdom whose artists mastered metal so perfectly, their work stunned the most powerful empire on earth. And yet, this place was burned, looted, and almost erased from history. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire. In the heart of what is now southern Nigeria, around the 11th century, a new power began to rise, the Kingdom of Benin. Led by kings known as Obas, this empire built a capital city so organized, it had streetlights fueled by palm oil, thriving markets, and advanced urban planning that put much of medieval Europe to shame. Surrounding the city were colossal earthworks, over 16,000 kilometers of walls and ditches, longer than the Great Wall of China, and built entirely by hand. But perhaps Benin's greatest achievement was its art. The famed Benin Bronzes, thousands of plaques, statues, and ceremonial pieces cast in brass and bronze, told the story of the kingdom's rulers, battles, and traditions. These weren't just decorations. They were history books in metal. They recorded the lineage of the Obas, the arrival of Portuguese traders, and the daily life of the kingdom, all with unmatched detail and skill. But in 1897, everything changed. After a clash between British officials and Benin forces, Britain launched what they called the Punitive Expedition. Thousands of soldiers marched on Benin City. The city was burned to the ground. The Oba was exiled, and over 4,000 of Benin's priceless bronzes were stolen, shipped to museums and private collections in Europe and America. To justify their actions, colonizers told the world Africa had no great civilizations, that these works were too advanced to be African-made. But the truth could not be erased. Today, the Kingdom of Benin's legacy is being reclaimed. Descendants of the royal family still live in Benin City. Nigerian artisans keep the bronze casting tradition alive, and around the world, stolen bronzes are slowly being returned to their homeland. The story of Benin is not just African history, it is world history. It is a story of power, artistry, loss, and resilience. And maybe, it's a story that asks us all a question: what else has been taken from history books? And what will we do to bring it back? An African kingdom with walls longer than the Great Wall of China. Artists who shaped molten metal into masterpieces that stunned the world. And a story so powerful, it was almost erased from history. This is the rise, the glory, and the betrayal of the Kingdom of Benin. Kingdom of Benin. Africa's empire they tried to erase. An African empire with walls longer than the Great Wall of China. Artists whose bronze masterpieces rewrote history. And a city so powerful, the British burned it to the ground. This is the story they didn't teach you. The Kingdom of Benin. Around the 11th century, In the heart of West Africa, a new power emerged. The Kingdom of Benin. Led by kings called Obas, this wasn't a small tribal state. It was a vast, organized empire. Benin City was a marvel. Massive earthworks, over 16,000 kilometers of walls and ditches, hand-built over centuries. Inside, straight streets lit by palm oil lamps, bustling markets, and the great royal palace. But what set Benin apart was its art. The legendary Benin Bronzes, thousands of brass and bronze plaques, statues, and ceremonial pieces, were more than decoration. They were history in metal. They recorded royal coronations, military victories, diplomatic meetings, even the arrival of Portuguese traders in the 15th century. The craftsmanship was so advanced, Europeans refused to believe Africans made them. Benin City was set ablaze. The Oba was exiled. Over 4,000 bronzes were stolen, shipped to museums and private collections around the world. The kingdom's greatness was buried under colonial lies. But the spirit of Benin never died. The royal line still exists. The bronzes still speak. And across the world, voices are demanding their return. This is more than African history. This is world history. A reminder that power, artistry, and identity can survive even the flames. They tried to erase Benin. They failed. The only question now is, what other truths are still waiting to be uncovered? The Kingdom of Benin, never forgotten. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire of bronze and power. What if I told you, one of the world's greatest empires wasn't in Europe or Asia, but deep in the heart of Africa? A city with walls longer than the Great Wall of China. Artists who turned molten metal into masterpieces that stunned the world. And a story so powerful, colonizers tried to erase it from history. This is the Kingdom of Benin. The Kingdom of Benin began around the 11th century, in what is today southern Nigeria. At first, it was a cluster of small settlements. But under the leadership of powerful kings, called Obas, it transformed into one of Africa's most sophisticated empires. Benin City was no ordinary capital. Its streets were laid out in perfect order, lit at night with palm oil lamps. The royal palace, a sprawling complex of courtyards, shrines, and halls, stood at its heart. Surrounding it all were monumental earthworks, ditches and walls stretching over 16,000 kilometers, longer than the Great Wall of China, and all of it built by hand. This wasn't a hidden village. This was a superpower. By the 15th century, Benin was flourishing. Its wealth came from palm oil, ivory, pepper, and later, its control of trade routes. When Portuguese explorers arrived in 1485, they were astonished by what they saw. One European wrote, "The city is large and well-ordered, with broad streets and great markets." They couldn't believe such sophistication existed in Africa. Benin's Obas quickly understood the power of diplomacy. They traded with Europe, but on their own terms. But perhaps the greatest treasure of Benin was its art, the Benin Bronzes. Thousands of plaques, statues, and ceremonial pieces cast in bronze, brass, and ivory. These were not trinkets. They were historical records. Each plaque told a story of battles fought, kings crowned, and foreign visitors welcomed. The level of detail and skill shocked even the Europeans. The perspective, the realism, the casting technique, centuries ahead of its time. So advanced, in fact, that when British soldiers first saw them, they claimed Africans couldn't possibly have made them. But they did. The fall. In 1897, everything changed. After years of rising tensions, Britain launched what they called the Punitive Expedition. Their goal, to destroy Benin once and for all. Thousands of troops stormed Benin City. The palace was looted. The city burned. The Oba was captured and exiled. And over 4,000 bronzes were stolen, shipped to museums and private collections across Europe. To cover their crime, colonizers spread a lie that Africa had no great civilizations, that Benin's art was too sophisticated to be African-made. The legacy. But history cannot be erased. Today, Benin's descendants still keep its traditions alive. The royal dynasty continues. Artisans still practice the ancient craft of bronze casting. And around the world, calls grow louder for the stolen bronzes to be returned home. Bit by bit, the treasures are coming back. And with them, the truth of a kingdom the world tried to forget. The Kingdom of Benin was more than an empire. It was proof that Africa's history is rich, complex, and brilliant. And it raises one haunting question. If they could erase Benin from history, what else have we been made to forget? The Kingdom of Benin, never forgotten. They built walls longer than the Great Wall of China, created bronze art so advanced, Europeans thought it was impossible. And then, the British burned their city to the ground. This was the Kingdom of Benin, a superpower erased from history books. But the truth is rising again, and the bronzes are finally coming home. Erased empire, stolen legacy, hidden power. The lost empire of Benin, Africa's hidden masterpiece. Deep in the heart of West Africa, where the forests whisper secrets and the earth remembers ancient footsteps, there once stood a kingdom so advanced, so artistically brilliant, that European explorers could hardly believe their eyes. This is the story of the Kingdom of Benin, not to be confused with the modern-day Republic of Benin, but a civilization that flourished in what is now southern Nigeria. A kingdom of bronze, blood, and brilliance. The rise of a kingdom. Founded around the 11th century, Benin began as a cluster of villages ruled by elders. But everything changed when the Edo people invited a prince from the neighboring Yoruba kingdom of Ife to lead them. His name? Ovonramwen. From his lineage came Eweka, the first Oba of Benin, a divine king whose descendants would rule for centuries. Under their leadership, Benin transformed into a centralized, powerful state. Power, politics, and the Oba. The Oba wasn't just a ruler. He was a god on earth. His word was law. His palace, a sprawling complex of red earth and sacred bronze, was the beating heart of the empire. Benin's political system was sophisticated, with councils, guilds, and a bureaucracy that rivaled any in Europe. And its military? Fierce, disciplined, and feared across the region. The art of immortality. But what truly set Benin apart was its art. The Benin Bronzes, intricate plaques and sculptures cast in brass and ivory, told stories of kings, battles, and rituals. They were more than decoration. They were history, frozen in metal. European visitors in the 15th century were stunned. How could an African kingdom produce such masterful work? The answer: centuries of innovation, spiritual devotion, and a guild system that passed secrets from generation to generation. The fall, fire and loot. In 1897, everything changed. After a diplomatic misunderstanding, British forces launched a brutal punitive expedition. They razed Benin's city to the ground, looted thousands of bronzes, and exiled the Oba. It was one of the most devastating cultural thefts in history. Today, those stolen artifacts sit in museums across Europe, silent witnesses to a forgotten glory. Legacy and rebirth. But Benin is not gone. Its legacy lives on in the Edo people, in the surviving royal lineage, and in the global movement to return its stolen treasures. The Kingdom of Benin was not a footnote in history. It was a masterpiece, and the world is finally beginning to remember. In the silence of museums and the whispers of the forest, Benin speaks. Are we ready to listen? Like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories from history's hidden corners. Drop a comment below. What do you think should happen to the Benin Bronzes? What are the Benin Bronzes? The term Benin Bronzes refers to thousands of intricately crafted metal plaques and sculptures produced by the Edo people of the Kingdom of Benin in present-day Nigeria. Despite the name, many of these works are made from brass, not bronze, and also include ivory, wood, and other materials. Artistic and cultural significance. Royal Commission. These artworks were created by the Guild of Benin Bronze Casters, a hereditary guild that worked exclusively for the Oba king. Their workshop was located on Igan Street in Benin City. Palace decoration. The most iconic pieces, cast brass plaques, once adorned the walls of the royal palace. They depicted scenes of court life, military exploits, rituals, and interactions with Europeans. Spiritual role. Many bronzes were used in ancestral altars and ceremonies to honor past Obas and queen mothers. They played a key role in validating the accession of new rulers. Craftsmanship and innovation. Technique. The bronzes were made using the lost wax casting method, a sophisticated technique that allowed for intricate detail and lifelike representation. Influences. The Benin bronze tradition may have been influenced by the older Kingdom of Ife, known for its naturalistic sculptures. Golden Ages. Artistic excellence peaked during the reigns of Oba Esigie, circa 1550, and Oba Esigie, 1735 to 1750, when the craftsmanship reached its zenith. Colonial loot and global dispersal. 1897 British invasion. During a punitive expedition, British forces looted Benin City, seizing thousands of bronzes and burning the royal palace too. Museum collections. Today, many of these artifacts reside in institutions like the British Museum, the Ethnological Museum in Berlin, and museums across the US and Europe. Restitution efforts. There's a growing movement to return these cultural treasures to Nigeria. Some museums have begun repatriating pieces, acknowledging their colonial origins. Legacy and relevance today. The Benin Bronzes are more than historical artifacts. They're symbols of African ingenuity, resilience, and cultural identity. They challenge outdated narratives about African civilizations and continue to inspire artists and historians worldwide. Royal history rendered in brass. This remarkable brass plaque, dated between 1550 to 1680, depicts an Oba, or king, and his attendants from the Benin Empire, a powerful kingdom located in present-day Nigeria. We know that the central figure is an Oba because of his distinctive coral-beaded regalia. Also, attendants hold shields above his head, either to protect him from attack or possibly from the hot, tropical sun. This was a privilege only afforded to an Oba. The figures around him range in size, not because of their actual height or distance from the Oba, but rather due to their level of importance within the court. This convention of sizing human figures based on status is known as hierarchic scale and is found in artwork from cultures around the world and across time. The Oba would have traveled with a large cohort of attendants, warriors, servants, diplomats, chieftains, and priests. The plaque originally hung alongside many others on posts throughout the palace of the Oba. The order of their placement on these posts would have told the history of the royal lineage of Benin's Obas, who traced their dynasty all the way back to Oranmian, whose son was the first Oba of Benin. However, the sequence of plaques is lost to us since they were long held in storage when found by Westerners in the 19th century. You may notice that the Oba rides side saddle on horseback, which would seem to indicate a connection to Oba Esigie, who ruled circa 1504 to 1550, the first Oba to travel by horse. However, without knowing the original order of the plaques, we will never know for certain whether this was Esigie or a later Oba who emulated his brash new mode of travel. Artists working in brass were organized under Esigie. Today, artists working in brass in Benin are part of a brass workers' guild, and it was likely that previous generations would have also worked collectively. These artists created plaques and other sculptures using what is known as the lost wax casting technique, in which, first, a more malleable wax version of the final brass work is made. It is then covered in clay and fired to harden the clay, removing the wax, which melts away in the process, hence the term lost wax. Hot, molten liquid brass is then poured into the clay mold. As the brass cools, it hardens, and the clay is removed, revealing the finished plaque. Crossing cultures, a record of trade. Almost every detail in this work speaks to the Benin Kingdom's mutually beneficial trade with Portugal, which first made contact with Benin in the late 15th century. The Portuguese received items like peppers, cloth, and stone beads from Benin, while Benin received, among other items, the coral that makes up the beads worn by the Oba, and even the brass that makes up this plaque in the form of manillas or armbands, worn by the Portuguese, which would have been melted down as the raw material for this plaque. The rosette shapes that adorn the background of the plaque were possibly derived from Christian crosses brought by these European traders. Even the horse that the Oba rides was originally introduced to West Africa from across the sea. There is nothing quite like these plaques in all of Africa or Europe from this period, and some scholars speculate that they were created as a way of reconciling traditional African brass sculptural forms with the illustrated books and prints that may have been in the possession of European travelers. Troubled legacy. Trade began to decline with Portugal as the Portuguese Empire waned in the 18th century. By the 19th century, Britain was seeking to make inroads with Benin as a new trading partner. However, this partnership was much less mutually beneficial and was marked with frequent tension. After increased aggression from both nations, the British launched the punitive expedition of 1897, seizing the Oba's palace, burning down the city around it, killing many, and looting the royal court's vast stores of art and treasure. We know that this plaque was one of the artworks looted in the siege because Norman Burroughs, a known trafficker in stolen Benin objects, owned it briefly during this time. This act of looting perpetrated by the British was later condemned as a criminal and violent act of British imperialism and colonialism. As such, there are many who believe that objects such as this plaque should be returned to the people of Benin, who remain deeply connected to their history and cultural traditions. However, there are others who feel that these remarkable objects are part of the world's heritage, and thus should remain in museum collections around the world as testament to this artistically rich culture. Backstory: a consortium of European museums called the Benin Dialogue Group, formed in 2007, has been meeting with representatives from Nigeria to discuss issues around repatriation. Their hope is to establish a system of rotating loans of artworks to Benin City, though the security and guaranteed return of the objects is a point of ongoing discussion, set to continue at a conference in 2018. The consortium includes representatives from the British Museum and Berlin's Humboldt Forum, two of the institutions that hold the largest collections of objects from Benin. Other members of the group include museums in Cambridge, Vienna, Stockholm, Leiden, Leipzig and Dresden, Oxford, Hamburg, and London. Museums in the United States and France, which also hold significant numbers of Benin artworks, have yet to become formally involved, though some, such as the Musée du Quai Branly-Jacques Chirac in Paris, have been approached directly with restitution claims from Nigeria. The ongoing dialogue between museums and nations from which important objects, like those from Benin, were forcibly removed, highlights the complexities of the current, post-colonial world. Should formerly colonized areas be repaid for the damage inflicted on them by colonial powers? Who is responsible for doing so, and how? Who has the ethical right to the ownership, display, and preservation of these important pieces of cultural heritage? The formation of consortia like the Benin Dialogue Group is a significant first step towards resolving some of these thorny and pressing questions. In the heart of West Africa, a powerful kingdom rose from the rainforests. Its capital was a sprawling, meticulously planned city of palaces, markets, and advanced infrastructure. Its artisans created masterpieces that would astound the world, and its rulers commanded a vast and wealthy empire. This is the story of the Kingdom of Benin, a civilization of unparalleled sophistication, and its tragic and controversial downfall. The rise of a mighty kingdom crown. The Kingdom of Benin, also known as the Edo Empire, was founded around the 10th century CE in what is now modern-day Nigeria. The kingdom was first ruled by a dynasty of kings called the Ogisos, but around 1200 CE, they were succeeded by the Obas, a new dynasty that would lead Benin to its golden age. The Oba was more than just a king. He was the supreme political, judicial, and spiritual leader. Under the rule of great Obas like Eweka the Great in the 15th century, Benin expanded its territory through military conquest and became a highly organized state. The capital, Benin City, was a marvel of urban planning, with massive earthen walls and moats, as well as a sophisticated drainage system and even street lamps. The art of Benin. But the true soul of the kingdom was its art. Benin's craftsmen were organized into hereditary guilds, with the most celebrated being the brass casters. Using the lost wax casting method, they created thousands of intricate sculptures, including commemorative heads, plaques, and animal figures. These works, collectively known as the Benin Bronzes, documented the kingdom's history, celebrated its rulers, and adorned the royal palace. They are considered some of the finest artworks ever produced in Africa, demonstrating a level of technical and artistic mastery that challenged European perceptions of African art at the time. European contact and trade. In the late 15th century, Benin came into contact with Portuguese traders. This new relationship brought new goods and wealth to the kingdom. Benin's control over trade was a source of its power, as it exported luxury goods like ivory, pepper, and palm oil. While the kingdom also engaged in the slave trade, it was the Oba who held a monopoly on all trade, a policy that would eventually lead to a devastating conflict. The punitive expedition and the fall of the kingdom. By the late 19th century, the British, driven by colonial ambitions and a desire for free trade, grew increasingly frustrated with the Oba's control over commerce. The situation came to a head in January 1897 when a British delegation, attempting to force its way into Benin City during a sacred festival despite warnings, was ambushed. This event, which the British called the Benin Massacre, served as the pretext for a full-scale military invasion. In February 1897, a British punitive expedition sacked Benin City. The palace was looted and burned, and the reigning Oba, Ovonramwen, was exiled. Thousands of artworks, including the priceless Benin Bronzes, were seized as spoils of war. They were later sold to museums and private collectors around the world, forever scattering Benin's artistic and historical heritage. The legacy of a looted heritage broken heart. The 1897 expedition effectively ended the independent Kingdom of Benin, and its territory was absorbed into British Nigeria. The Benin Bronzes, now in museums across Europe and North America, have become a powerful symbol of colonial injustice and the global movement for the repatriation of cultural artifacts. While many pieces have been returned in recent years, the debate continues, highlighting the ongoing struggle to reclaim a looted heritage and restore the history of a once great kingdom. The Kingdom of Benin was more than an empire. It was a world of power, art, and resilience, proof that Africa's history is far richer than we've been told. They tried to erase Benin, but its legacy still speaks. And the question remains, if one empire could be buried, how many more stories are waiting to be uncovered? What else have we been made to forget? If this story moved you, don't stop here. Dive into more untold histories, stories of hidden kingdoms, stolen legacies, and forgotten power. Click on the next video, and let's keep rewriting history together. The art they tried to erase. The Kingdom of Benin wasn't just an empire of walls and warriors. It was a kingdom of ideas, of artistry, of innovation. Its bronzes carried memory. Its walls carried strength. And its people carried a vision of power that shook the world. But history wasn't kind. Colonizers set its city on fire, scattered its treasures, and told the world it never truly existed. Yet here we are. The legacy of Benin still breathes, in its art, its descendants, and in every demand for justice echoing today. And now, piece by piece, the truth is returning. The bronzes are coming home. The story is being retold, and the world is finally listening. What else has been erased? But here's the question. If they could erase the Kingdom of Benin from the history books, how many other empires, stories, and voices have been silenced too? If you're ready to uncover them, don't stop here. Click the next video, where we dive into more hidden histories the world tried to forget. Together, we're rewriting history, one story at a time.